Joe, I want to I want to go back a little bit. You started your career in law enforcement due to some personal experiences of losing people close to you. Was it always the plan to become a lawyer eventually, or did you know that was on your trajectory for the future?
No, it was not the original plan. I mean, I wasn't sure what I would do. I frankly thought I'd follow in my dad's footsteps into medicine. And even while I was in law enforcement, I was looking at medical programs around the country. I thought that I would combine my interest in medicine and my interest in physics and mechanics and end up, honestly, what I thought, I don't think I've ever told anybody this. I thought what I was going to be when I grew up was going to be a prosthetist. Now, careful the way you say that.
Right.
Somebody who works with prostheses and specifically robotic ones that I've always been fascinated by because they give back to somebody capabilities that I think are incredible and the work that people do in that area. So it's always fascinating.
Wow. That's really interesting, and I've never heard that career choice. And I've seen, I think the one movie that I really stands out, The Fugitive with Harrison Ford, kind of a throwback. So what kind of, I like the aspect of giving back, and geez, that's I never thought of, from to have them live a normal life. What made it about that career? Like, where did you first get an interest about that?
Well, I think it was just a combination of things that I've always been interested in. I mean, I think that, I came up with kind of a technical background. Before I decided to ultimately go to law school, I was a physics major. I didn't graduate with a physics major, but my list of electives, if people looked at them, they'd go, holy moly, why do you have, all these calculus and science classes as electives? Shouldn't they have been easier? And the answer is yes, they should have been. But so, I've always been somebody who I was brought up to believe, and I still believe today, that a life worth living is a life in service of other people, that our job is to try to leave this place better than we found it. And so that was just something that caught my attention. It's something that I thought would be interesting to work on. And then, of course, my experience in law enforcement brought me into courtrooms, and that started to change. And that's where this idea opening up of being an attorney came out.
So you were in the courtrooms, probably having to testify, and did you get that experience? And that's kind of what opened your eyes to the legal field?
It is. I mean, I could sense the very first time I ever stepped into a courtroom for something other than to pay a ticket, which I unfortunately was in a few times. I could feel that there was an energy in the courtroom, and I could kind of sense that important things happen there. And the more time I spent in the courtroom as a police officer, the more I really saw that justice, although it's supposed to be blind, really isn't, and that the lawyer makes a huge difference. I mean, I saw different lawyers get treated differently in courtrooms. Different lawyers get different results in courtrooms for their clients. And that captured my attention. And I said, okay, so important things happen here. What if I could be that? What if I could be somebody who could represent other people and help bring about justice? And so that was kind of the beginning of it.
I love that. I love that. So it's like a passion and an interest, and I love that so much. And I kind of wanted to get the background story of not only you choosing the career of being an attorney, but kind of even segueing like the story of how you eventually got into the niche that you're in today, where you're really this preeminent truck accident lawyer across the nation, and what you're doing in that space. So how did, the transition from police officer to attorney, and then take me to fill that gap for me to where you got into trucking?
Okay, I'll fill it relatively quickly, but just so that we can get more onto the trucking side. But it is the story really is that from my perspective, I started as a young lawyer. I didn't come from a family of lawyers. I didn't come, so I, get out into this world. And I remember being at a conference with other lawyers, and it was like I was in a conference room, and it was like a sea of lawyer heads. And I remember just suddenly feeling very small and looking around and saying, how can I ever be anything in this crowd? I mean, I wouldn't hire me. I'd hire that guy over there who's the grandson of the governor, and that person over there who's had 3 judges in their family, and that person over there who has all these results. And about that same time, somebody came up to me and asked me what it takes to be an expert in something. And I said, a PhD and 20 years of experience. And they said, well, that helps, but it's not really what's needed. I mean, for you to be looked at as an expert in something, you have to write something that has some authority behind it, that your peer group looks at and recognizes it as a scholarly work. And then you have to be asked by your peer group to present on that. And once you sort of take the stage, if you will, take the dais and start to speak to your own peer group, then by God, they're looking at you as an expert in at least that little thing. And that somehow clicked in my young lawyer brain as making sense. And I marched down to the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association office, and I asked, who puts the programs on? Who's the CLE, continuing education person? And I knew something about committees, and that's that there's usually a chair who ends up doing all the damn work. And you got a bunch of people whose name is on a committee, but they usually don't do any work, and the chair is desperate for help. And so I called the guy up. I didn't know him. I called him up and I said, I'm sure you're working too hard. He goes, man, I can't get anybody to help me with anything. I said, well, if you put me on your committee, he stopped me right there. He said, you're on the committee. I said, okay.
Wow.
I said, well, look, I'm willing to be a worker bee. How can I help? And I guess I did enough help to where the next year he recommended that I be the chair of that group. And I stayed in that role for a couple of years, which nobody had ever asked to do before. But I learned it very, very well. And so it's a long story to say I learned how to become an expert in something through that little story. And then what I recognized in the process is that the more niche you become, the easier it is to become known. And so I've gone through a couple of iterations of that in my practice, where I actually spent, and you know this, I spent close to a decade of my life doing nothing but post-rear impact fire cases. Think the Pinto case.
Right.
But for a decade. Mm-hmm. But that was so niche. People would say, how the hell do you make a living doing that? And I made a good living doing it. But I also became nationally known, and just a young lawyer from Georgia became nationally known because I wouldn't have, but for the fact that I became known for something very, very narrow. There's no way I could have gotten known for being, quote, a great lawyer, or quote, a great trial lawyer, or quote, a great anything. Unless it was really, really niche. At least that's my mindset on it, because there's too much competition otherwise. So fast forward to trucking, and at the time that I decided, I made a conscious decision. I'm happy to tell you how that came about, but I made a conscious decision to choose trucking. At the time, nobody was a trucking lawyer. Right. Or if they were, I didn't know any of them. And so I helped to create this field, and then created myself into the niche, into the leadership in the field. It's not really magic. It took a little bit of, some people say it took a lot of courage to do that. The truth is it took the experiences that I had. So I had been validated in this idea that niche is the way for me to go because of my life experiences.
There's so much to unpack there, being an expert, the Malcolm Gladwell putting in 10,000 hours. So you're working on these rear end combustion. I mean, there was nobody that understood those vehicles more than you. And I remember hearing a story about you crawling under a vehicle at a show to see if it still had, a defect. I like that there's just other things about you being intentional about just having that awareness of, hey, this chair is probably overloaded and needs help, and this is a way that I can stand out. And it's a blue ocean strategy as opposed to swimming with the sharks where everyone is. You carved out your niche, and I really applaud you for that. And one of the things I wanted to key in on too is this. Everyone listening is probably like, oh, Joe's specializing in trucking, it's a no-brainer. But being one of the first ins to really pursue that, what was it like to take that leap? How did you evaluate the opportunity that there were enough trucking cases to really be your core focus?
Well, there's a couple of things in there to unpack. One, I want to give a shout out to my mom, who's the one who first told me not to swim with the sharks. She uh, obviously came up in a different time in the world. She would have been an amazing lawyer. She's an amazingly wise person. She's 90 years old now, and she's one of my heroes. And she's the one who taught me to not swim with everybody else. To take that the smarter way. When everybody's selling in the stock market, that's when you buy. And so when you said that, it struck me that's where that came from in me, and I wanted to honor that.
Wonderful.
Second thing is on trucking specifically, at first I'll tell you, people laughed at me. People literally made fun of what I was trying to do. Some really fine lawyers, it's that half laughing at you where, they're not trying to be jerks necessarily about it, but they are laughing at you, if you know what I mean, that kind of feeling like, but they didn't, and it's because, literally, I was taking myself off of all of these board of directors that I'd gotten myself onto in the product arena, in the automotive product arena, that people work their lifetime to get onto these boards and to become known for a specific thing. And I was giving that up to choose trucking. And I didn't know how successful it would end up being. What I trusted, because of if I could get enough post-rear impact fire cases to make a living, what I knew is I'd have to be open to my geography being bigger than just Metro Atlanta. And if I was willing to have the geography, which I already was on airplanes all the time anyway, then I just trusted. I remember the night, very well. I'll never forget it, when I decided to focus on trucking, and the tug of war that was going on, my internal voices was, will there be enough cases? And I remember thinking, I don't really need that many. If I do a good job on the cases, I don't really need that many in order to do fine. And I remember getting up and, ultimately when I teamed up with my law partners, my law partner's biggest hesitation was, Joe, people are going to stop thinking about us for everything else, and we're not going to get enough trucking cases. And I said, I disagree. And if you don't want to do it, that's fine. I'll do it. Just Joe Freed is the truck guy. And of course now, we turn away more cases than we're involved in, because it's there. And now people recognize this as truly a field that's different than the regular auto rec field, and that's appropriate. That's not just a gimmick of a marketing statement. These cases are different in kind. So anyway, I jumped around on your answer there, but
that was a perfect answer, and I wanted to take a different transition. I didn't really prepare for this, but I know you're going to be ready to answer these. I wanted to talk kind of about the pros and cons, because there are some cons, but I really want to start with some of the pros. And let's just, hitting these main functions of a business. Let's talk about the first. What's the benefit from a marketing standpoint of being a specialist, particularly in trucking? How does that help, your firm? How do you, what benefits from niching is there in a marketing perspective?
Well, let me start answering in a way that may be a little bit atypical for the answer. And that's the step immediately before the benefit.
Okay.
From a business perspective, is the benefit to a feeling of competency. And I don't know. My bet is that a lot of people maybe don't want to talk about this, but my experience, I don't think I'm alone in this, is that one of our sort of core human struggles as a professional, but as a human, is just are you competent? Are you good enough? And so it served me there to be able to say, I'm going to pick this niche area, and I'm going to make a commitment that there is nobody who's going to know this crap better than me. I'm going to have a PhD in trucking. And then if there's what degree of black belt, I want to be the 10th degree black belt in trucking. I may not know crap about anything else, but that is the setup first, because if you have the feeling of competency that you could put yourself up against anybody, then guess what? You can. As opposed to saying, I'm just going to be the best lawyer I can be. Well, guess what? There's always going to be better lawyers than you, right? I mean, it's just like being the best runner. There's always going to be somebody faster, stronger, taller, better looking, whatever you want your point of comparison. So step one to me is that the focusing gives you a true subject matter expertise where you can go and have a discussion with anybody. And that's a game changer in and of itself. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You've heard the quote, competency builds confidence. And I
That
think with confidence, you can lead.
if I were a good lawyer, I would have been able to say in 3 words, like you just did, what took me 10 minutes to just explain. But I think it's a huge big deal, because sometimes we jump to the second question is, what's the benefit of having a niche practice, without recognizing that there's a whole human sort of piece that for some of us lawyers, for some of us humans who have that struggle that I've described, really helps an awful lot. But then beyond that, the next place where it's helpful is it's the power of focus. And there's all kinds of people who've presented and talked about the power of focus, but it's a whole lot. Even now, I've been out of doing car fire cases for 15, 16 years now. I still get phone calls saying, hey man, I met you on an elevator 20 years ago. You're the only lawyer I've ever known who said you were a post-rear collision fire case. Well, I have one of those cases. I'm like, well, I'm not that guy anymore. I've converted. But so the power is, you now focus all of your energy in a narrow spot, and it becomes easier to become known for it. It becomes easier to get asked to present on it. It gets easier. I'm not an SEO marketing person. I can't even spell SEO, but I know enough to know that if you're going to have a website with 100 pages, and all 100 pages are trucking pages, then that's going to generate a different level of trucking practice than if you're covering everything from A to Z, whatever automobile to zebra bites, on your website. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that you build the subject matter expertise, you put out in the world that this is what you are. You have to live with the discomfort of the feeling that you're going to stop getting other things, and the fear of that, and recognize the power of that, which is you're going to stop getting other things. Yes, exactly. So.
Right. And as an SEO guy, I pulled up your site, and I can indeed vouch for you ranking really well for many trucking terms. So you're 100% dead on there. And I think one of the things that people underestimate too is when you have this deep level of expertise, you're going to be able to identify content that needs to be created that the lay person, the person not in your field of expertise, may not even consider writing. And you would be the sole source, again, standing out in that blue ocean, as opposed to everyone writing the types of truck accidents, the types of injuries, where you really have some unique information on your site about carriers and all. You have a book that details trucking cases, and just it is a resource.
Chris, you also have a valid opinion. I know that, if that makes sense. You're not just putting out content that are factual content, but people are also interested suddenly because you really are. I mean, I view myself very much as a safety advocate in the trucking field. And I'm not the only one who views myself that way. The industry views me that way, not only the lawyer industry, but the industry. So I get asked for comments all the time. And so your opinion, when you are a subject matter expert, is content also, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And even in the SEO world, I got to relate it to that, is the expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. Google's trying to make it a point to show content that's written by an attorney or content that's written by a physician. For example, they wouldn't want someone like me explaining what to do if you were sick, right? I'm not a physician. They want a
Right.
doctor to have that information, and they want it to be trusted. So you really highlight that you're the trusted source, providing that information.
Nobody cares if you and I think that wearing a mask is a good idea or not
Right.
for coronavirus. But if you happen to be a virologist and that's your field, then people do care because people want to
Right.
know. So it's the same concept.
Absolutely. I love that comparison. I want to jump over to the operations side a little bit on the niching, because have you seen let's talk about maybe some of those efficiencies that individuals don't think about where you're handling, maybe cases that are similar to ones you've handled in the past, and you're not having to recreate a blank canvas every time, and you're doing a slip and fall, then you're doing another case and trying to, where you can really dial in these efficiencies. So how does it affect you on the operation side?
Yeah, quick story, and then I'll answer the question because it goes to the point. Recently I was talking to a defense lawyer, and I was deposing his client. We were at a break, and he said, "Joe, my problem in preparing my clients for your deposition is you're not prepared for a deposition. You're prepared for any deposition." And it kind of goes to what you're saying. The subject matter expertise, a few things happen. You have to be careful about some of these things because you don't want to become so myopic and so rote that you lose the edge. You just start doing things the same way every time. And so there's efficiencies, and then there's crossing to a place that I think becomes less healthy because you want to keep pushing the envelope. And if you're the leader in the field, I feel an obligation to continue to push the envelope because I know people are taking my outlines and my work product and using that in their work. So I want to have the best, most forward stuff. But so here's the efficiencies. The efficiencies are, I think, because of, first of all, that knowledge base. Once you get all these algorithms on paper and in your head about how a case can proceed, there's certain themes that get repeated. There's certainly defendants. I mean, like, I don't have to, at the beginning of my trucking career, it was all about building the case against the trucking company. What could I get? What materials? What's the thought processes? What are the what are the policies? What are the procedures? What are all of these things? And it was a fight at this sort of individual basis. Now, because I've done that so much, first of all, I've got the book on so many companies now. I mean, I literally have hundreds and hundreds of driver safety manuals. So what does that do for me? Now, if I'm going to depose you, a company I've never worked against, I used to care a lot about what your manual would say. Now I've got 100 manuals. I'm going to come to the deposition with the strength of 100 manuals. Tell me what your manual says. You better have a good manual, because if you don't, I'm going to be able to take out 100 manuals and beat you upside the head with them and say, are you as safe as this company, as this company, as this company, as this company? This is your prime competition. They have this in their manual. Where's yours? And so my ability to bring to the table that kind of stuff is there. So there's an efficiency on that side in terms of knowledge. There's also a tremendous efficiency in the preparation phase, because you know directionally where you're going to. In my mind, I think about it, and this is maybe the science part of my background, is everything's an algorithm, right? So I know if there's a case, I'll give you a quick example. If there's a case where a truck hits a car on a dark highway, the car was disabled in the roadway, there's only a few ways that case can play out. And I've got them all in my head, and I've got them all on paper, and I've got already all of the support materials for the different ways that can play out, right? It's either a case where the truck driver should have had their high beams on, and if he did, he would have seen the vehicle in time to avoid it, or he's driving too fast for his headlights, or it only plays out a few different ways, and I've already got those algorithms in my head. So I've got to be careful not to miss things because I've got the algorithms in my head, but I'm 1,000 times ahead of most people who haven't developed that expertise. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question great,
I think you are. I think it's a perfect explanation. And the way my background's in education, I started as a history teacher, and I remember the Bloom's taxonomy. You know, you had that triangle where at the beginning someone can read it, they have a little bit of recall and can pass a quiz, and then they can you start to move up the triangle and you get analyze, and at the very peak is you can innovate, and
Right.
that it makes me relate to your story about the manual.
Yeah.
Well, because you know all of this information about all these manuals, you can really attack and defend, no matter what, because you have a large basis of knowledge to pull from.
So, right. Go take it. I look forward to taking an expert witness's deposition with a smile on my face, because I know it's going to be an intellectual challenge if I've got the expert. But I also know something else. I know that my knowledge, I can put my knowledge base, and I hope this doesn't sound arrogant. I don't intend it to. This has taken years of work to get. I mean, there are very few people who would spend the hours on the minutia that I've spent in this field. But I do it because I love the field and I love what I do. But I know that I can sit across from any expert in this little niche area, and I can stand my own. By gosh, I know the stuff at least as well as they do, and they're not going to pull the wool over my eyes. And I have, because of that background and sort of that library of materials that I keep in my head and on my iPad, when they say something, I can go, I have 8 things that say the opposite. Let's start to play. And it's really very difficult. It's difficult to overcome that. And it's really fun as a lawyer. I have to tell you, it's fun to have the true expertise. You can be fair. You don't have to make something out of nothing. You can be appropriate. You can wear the white hat in the case, and you can stop being as lawyer-ish, which I think sometimes causes cases to go south. And you can be a human being, channeling a jury of people who are going to make a decision on a case and showing them why your position is the credible position. And that's what wins cases at the end of the day. You being credible and presenting a credible story.
It's an incredible piece of advice. And I can just imagine that a jury, listening to you speak upon this topic would just feel that sense of trust that you were the expert, just due to the stories and the experience that you can share in the courtroom.
Well, I just took a safety director's deposition of one of the largest trucking companies in the country. I'm not going to mention the name just to avoid problems down the road. But in the middle of the deposition, we're getting to one point, and he says, "Well, Mr. Freed, I know you're the expert in safety on this area, but this is my position. I'm the freaking lawyer on the other side of the case." But he looked at me and and spontaneously produces, "Well, I know you're the expert in safety on this area." That's a pretty good place to be if you're now going to be trying a case against one of the largest trucking companies in the country, and their director of safety, vice president of safety, is going to stand up and represent to the court that you're the expert in safety. Imagine what that does in a courtroom when it comes to whether a jury views you as a credible human being or not. You're not just the typical lawyer there anymore. You really are somebody who's there in the capacity. That doesn't mean that a lawyer in my spot's always going to be credible, but that's a whole nother story. We could talk about that for an hour, about the decision to be a credible human. But it's pretty good. It's a pretty good starting point when you can be viewed that way.
And I think that when they have the integrity enough to say that, then I think the jury just immediately picks up on that, and then they let their guard down, and it's not just an attorney. This is an individual that cares, and is trying to make a difference too.
Chris, when you talk to people about SEO, Malcolm Gladwell would be able to explain this a lot better than I could, but people know in an instant if you're the real deal or not. When you speak to people in your field, in your field, in an instant if they're the real deal or if they're a player playing at being the real deal. You
Right.
know it in an instant. And if someone were to say to you, how do you know, Chris? You might say, well, I'm not sure exactly how I know, but I know, right? And I think that's the same thing. It sort of happens at an energy level. The competence, the credibility oozes out one way or the other, either snake oil salesperson or a real deal. Both of those ooze out. And I think human beings have really good radar for that, you know? So at the end of the day, if you're the lawyer and you really are a subject matter expert, and you are using that power for good as opposed to that power for evil, which is another, part of that credibility story, I think it oozes out. I think that it matters.
It's that intangible, and I completely agree. You just know. It's really hard to nail down. I wanted to go a little bit different, and I don't know your space, but have you thought about going deeper? I know you do trucking cases. Have you thought about doing, I don't know, 18 wheeler only, or I don't know the different types of truck cat cases like you do.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a moment where you think, geez, I really just need, I find myself when I'm niching and I talk to other niche specialists, they keep wanting to go more narrow because they understand the space better. Has that came, have you thought about that? Um,
I've thought about it. It's funny because, I talked about my mom earlier. My dad was a physician. He used to say things to me like, that something looks so simple, and then you put it under a microscope and it becomes the whole world. And now it's got all the complexities. And if you were to get that even higher power, it becomes, and that's what you're talking about. I mean, now, so I'm niche in terms of being trucking within the PI world, which is so much bigger. And now within trucking, am I niching down within trucking? And the answer is that I do, but I do it by excluding certain types of cases that I'm really much less interested in. It's not that I never do them, but there's certain types of cases that I have found that I'm most effective in, and I tend to focus on those areas. Like for instance, broker liability is a big field. I've helped to develop that field, but I don't do very many broker cases. And within broker, I just do really one kind of broker case, which has to do with brokers who exercise too much control or a lot of control over a motor carrier. And in those cases, I like those cases. My heart's in those cases, and I do them. But I have now, it's now that I sort of have helped to develop this field, and there's lawyers all over the place who are concentrating on trucking. There are some lawyers who do a bunch of broker cases, and frankly, that's great. I'm happy for them. So I am niching down, in that regard, within the field. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but
absolutely
yes.
does. And I think I kind of relate a lot of business to sports. So you got your pitcher, but then you got your pitcher that maybe specializes in the curveball or the changeup. And
Right.
there's a lot of different approaches to be successful in a particular area, even in business and sports, whatever. And I just was curious about that aspect because
Well,
it's also something that I'm not a specialist in. And you're talking about these broker cases. Well, that's I would have to go Google what exactly even those are.
yeah. And there's other things that, based on my expertise in the field, that have captured my attention. For instance, I'm a big I have a big focus right now on trucks parked on the side of highways, which are that is something that the general public doesn't recognize as dangerous as it really is. There are hundreds of people who are killed every year and who are maimed every year by getting in wrecks. The industry knows this. There's just a constant. There's a parking problem with trucks. So, we can get into all the details, but
Right.
So because this has become an area that I feel like I can make a difference in, I'm a believer in you kind of put that out in the universe and cases will come. And so I've been getting a few of these kinds of cases, and they're interesting to me, and I'm taking them, and they're viewed as very, very hard liability cases because generally my client has run into the back of a stopped tractor trailer. But once, so there's a lot of challenge to those cases, but I believe in that. I believe in that challenge, and I believe that the world needs to understand that this is a ridiculous risk to put out there, and it's going to take someone with my expertise to shine a light on that. So that's another way to niche down, is if you have the blessings of being able to choose where you're going to put your attention in cases, then you can choose the things that are important to you. And it's not always about money. It's about making a difference.
I like that a lot. And there's so much there. And yeah, I've noticed that myself. If my wife was listening, she when she drives and she gets next to a truck, she gets real anxious. And I think her driving abilities decrease just because of her anxiety. And I imagine just the vehicles on the side of the road do that type of thing. I kind of wanted to switch over to just briefly on the cons. Do you yourself see any of the cons to niching? What do you think about? Are there any cons? Do you just think about? Are you more the optimist? Think about the benefits and what do you think about the cons of niching?
Well, I don't think niching is for everyone. I mean, for me, I don't see many cons for me, for Joe Freed, because I'm not. Some people would say, "Well, I'm going to get bored if I only do trucking. I didn't sign up to be a lawyer, to be a safety advocate in the trucking field. That's not something that's interesting enough to me to where I want to dedicate my life to that." And if that's true, then you shouldn't be a truck lawyer, even though you might make a good living doing it. You shouldn't do it. If just like, so, and that's true within PI. I mean, there's some people who want to be generalists. There's some people who want to try all kinds of cases. They want to, you're not going to get to do that. So there are opportunity costs in whatever direction you go. And you may not, like my partner said early on, you may not get the XYZ case that you might be interested in if the world only knows you as a truck crash lawyer. So I think to me, that's the downside, so to speak. If you want to say the con is the exact inverse of the pro. That you are, by niching down, you're saying, I'm not going to do these other things. And so the con is exactly, you're not going to do those other things. Right. And so do you really want the niche or not? So what is another corollary question there that I think is worth asking and answering is from a financial perspective, or when you do decide, the counterintuitive part is that when you, I'm trying to say this and it's not coming out very good. The counterintuitive part is that if you focus and niche down, that you won't get other cases. That the reality is you're just viewed as a good lawyer. You are thought of, you become top of mind for a particular kind of case. But my law partner and I, we do every now and then a case comes in that grabs our attention that's not trucking, and we get those cases. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question great or not, but the con is the inverse of the pro. So if you're going to be somebody who's going to be really bored really quickly, you don't really love the field, and you're going to put yourself in a position where you're making a choice just for money or whatever, I think that's a mistake. I think you have to find the lesson I'm trying to tell my kids as they're growing up is you're truly a blessed human if you can find a way to earn your living in an area that you love. I mean, I've been practicing law for almost 30 years now, and I still look forward to getting up and being a lawyer. What a blessing that is, to be able to do that. So, there's some days I'm not so sure I want to get up and be the lawyer, but most days I do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it brings you energy. It just doesn't drain you and you look forward to it. So a lot of times
True.
I don't personally love the question, how do you balance work and home life? Well, if you love what you do, it's not like a problem, an energy drainer. It's actually, it's okay, so I don't know that there truly is a home work life balance. I don't know, but that's just my
Success.
personal.
What I always say to people when they and say, I remind myself of this, that show me a successful person who has balance, and I'll show you I'll show you a successful person who built their life on balance. What I mean by that is you treasure what you measure and all those kind of things, all those what your metrics are. The reality is, it's like the reality is success, I don't think, is born from balance. Success is born from concentration on something. If you look at wealth in the world, wealth is not created by a balanced portfolio. Wealth is created by a focused position on something that does well. But to do that requires risk also. But when we talk about balance, I do think it's important. And at some point you wake up and you realize that you've neglected certain areas of your life, your health, your relationships, and they won't stay forever. Those relationships, if you pass a certain place, you will forever have damaged those relationships and your health, and probably other areas of your spiritual development and whatever. So making room within your life to be mindful of that, I think, is very important.
You teed that one up for me, Joe. So I was going to jump right into the Peloton. So first of all, how many?
Yeah.
What's your how many days in a row? What was the
Here,
top?
we'll figure it out together here real quick. I'll tell you. Siri, how many days has it been since January 1, 2020? It was 419 days ago. So I have been 419 days on the bike that without missing a day. And so that's been a life changer for me.
That's incredible. So my next question is, when you're on the road and you fly a lot, is it on the bike? So you hit the hotel gym and so it's the bike riding.
Yeah, for me, it was not, I was never a cyclist. And I needed something that I could spend 30 minutes on, that I could try to do from anywhere. And the bike just made sense. I had the Peloton for 6 or 8 months before I started really using it. It was a clothes hanging device before, if you know what I mean. But so now when I travel, there's this one added piece that me and the people who help me travel know is important, that I have to have a bike to ride. It doesn't always have to be a Peloton, but my preference is the Peloton, and I can sign in from anywhere. But even if I don't have a Peloton, if I can get to a bike, I can use the Peloton app on my phone.
Nice.
I'll still ride to the Peloton app, but I don't have the metrics that I get, which, really, to me, the only metric that matters the most is the time. How much time am I putting in? But I would be lying if I didn't say I keep track of that output also. But yeah, so that's what it is. So, now my assistant who books my travel books me in hotels that have a Peloton if possible. And if not, her job is to find me someplace that either has a Peloton or a gym that's a spin class place, or someplace that I can get to, even during the pandemic, that I can get to a bike. And there's been at least one, I think there's been 2 times where we've actually called lawyers in a community where I was going to be, where I couldn't find a Peloton, but I knew they were in the Peloton community. And, hey man, I hate to ask you this, but can I borrow your Peloton for 30 minutes? I'll clean it when I'm done and all that kind of stuff. But by gosh, it's been a shift for me from somebody who has a goal of doing something 30 minutes a day, and I know this sounds subtle, but it's really, to me, it's profound. I've become somebody who rides the bike 30 minutes a day. That's part of who I am, as opposed to it being a goal. I know that you get the difference. It's a difference in
Yeah.
mentality.
I've heard other individuals say that have lost weight, where they understood that, no, I am a healthy person, and what would a healthy person do? What choices would they make? So now you
You're
are a
hitting on
rider.
you're hitting on exactly the point that I was trying to make. Because what happens is when you become the person, instead of having a goal to be the person, when you become the person, then you make other choices that support. Because I'm a person who does this, I go through the extra work of making sure that when I travel, I have a bike available. If I was somebody who just had a goal of doing it, I might not do that. It may not be important enough. The other thing about a goal is we tend to hit goals and then we start to immediately backtrack. Well, I mean, I've lost 20 pounds, great. And guess what? Next thing you know, you found 20 plus interest, right? Because it comes back, as opposed to finding a way to be somebody who's 20 pounds lighter, and that's now who I am.
Wow, that's such a great piece of advice on its own. And Joe,
It's
I want
true.
to.
It's true in being a niche lawyer also.
Mhm.
I mean, when you put out to the world, it's not. Don't come to me and say, I've got people every week who come to me and say, I want to duplicate what you've done. I go, great. All you got to do is stop doing everything else. And if you do that, I'll help you. I'll help you truly. I'll help you succeed. And there are many out there who I could give you names who are making good livings as trucking lawyers who I've helped them at my own, you know, they're my competition now, but they're also my friends. And I'm happy to help anybody who wants to practice in this area. But there's a cost of admission, and the cost isn't coming to me. The cost is, are you willing to make the commitment that that's really what you want to do? And that's not something I can make for you. But it's the same thing that we're talking about, isn't it? It's making the commitment. I am a truck lawyer. If I am, then that's my niche. And it's not, I've got a goal to someday let go of that part of my practice that I now make a lot of money at. But I'm going to only do that once I have enough trucking cases you get where I'm going.
I think that's wonderful. I think that's a phenomenal piece of advice. I think it's a way that you can look at a lot of things in life. It just relates to so many things.
It does.
Particularly, on the health, you've got your diets that kind of end, and then people fall off the wagon there. And it's such a great way to look at, just life in general, of the
So
different choices.
I agree, but then it also holds up sometimes an ugly mirror, right? Because
Right.
you start asking yourself questions like, am I a good father? Am I a good husband? Am I a good human being? Am I a good son? Am I a good, you know, fill in the blank? Am I a good law partner? Am I, am I a good human? Am I a good Christian? Am I a good Jewish person? Am I a good Muslim? I mean, whatever you put out there, if you are, you get where, I mean,
I do. It's like
I'm
a
getting,
way to reflect it, like an introspective type of thing. And I think it's a good practice. I think that, and I know we're getting close to your time, Joe, and I want to respect your time. I think so many individuals, it's like, well, if I get to 8 figures, I'll be happy. Or if I get to, if I hit this next big case, I'll be happy. But I think there's kind of the journey, and being introspective of who you are, and what gives you pleasure, in life and business, and being a father, and all these different aspects.
well, but I mean, it's the mental game we human beings play with ourselves. When I get to X, I'll be happy. Why don't you just choose to be happy now and on your path to X? I mean, you don't have to. Is it a, yeah, I mean, when I get to Y, I'll be secure. Not really. When you get to Y, you'll see Z, and you'll go, man, I got to get to Z. And when you get to Z, you'll start with double A, because there's, that's the human sort of, it's that void that we are always looking to fill. I think at some point. I know that there's supposed to be fulfillment in the big picture at some point, but I mean, we all struggle to define success And then when we reach that point where we had defined success, generally, instead of feeling successful, we just redefine success.
Very interesting. Yeah, that there's so much to talk about right there that we could possibly have another whole podcast on. And but I want to let's get to our closing up on our 3 for 3. This is a quick fire round, Joe. I've had so much fun talking to you, and so this is just a quick fire 3 questions. Which habit contributes the most to your success?
Grit, which I think is a habit. It's something you practice every day, even when you don't want to. And it's true on the Peloton, and it's true in the rest of life. You just have to get up and do it.
Love it. Which entrepreneur do you admire the most?
Elon Musk.
And if you had to recommend one business book, which would it be and why?
Ooh. I don't know how to answer that one. That one's a harder one for me.
You could cheat and maybe give me a few if you want.
Well, I'm not, most of my reading is not about business. It's about understanding the human animal. So I would say one important book would be the book, I think it's called Persuasion, and it's by what's his name? It's jumped out of my head. Sibaldi, I think is what.
I can see the book cover, but that's one I haven't read.
Yeah, it's a slow internet. It's Robert Cialdini. Cialdini. The reason that's important to me, and I'm sorry, I know it's quick fire, but the reason it's important to me is I think at the end of the day, we are all in the business of people, and understanding what persuades people and how to meet people where they are and take them on a journey serves us in anything that we do. So that's why I would pick that. It's different than a business strategy book, which I'm sure there are great ones out there. That's just not where I spend my time.
Yeah, I think I have read that one, that the reciprocity, authority, some of those different elements. That's such a great book. It's been a while since I have read it. But Joe, this was such a great interview, and thank you so much for coming on the show. And I just really appreciated speaking with you, and thank you for sharing all your knowledge with our audience.
Well, I appreciate it, Chris. I'm a fan of yours and what you're doing. Your field is a lot like mine. There are a lot of people in it, but that doesn't mean they're all the same. And so I've been watching what you've been doing, and I'm proud of the way you're going about doing it.
Well,
so I hope we can do some
more
work
together.
together.
Thank you so much, Joe.